Flashback, Episode 10, Getting into the United States and Friends in Low Places. We were on our way to New York City of Dis, flying from Athlone, Ireland, in our custom RV in the sky retrofitted turboprop cargo plane. We descended into Canadian airspace on their eastern coast near Nova Scotia, whereupon Tiny remarkably flew the cargo plane like a UK to Ireland puddle jumper craft. Right atop the water, we flew so close that you could see the wings just over the waves. It was terrifying. It felt like we were surfing the waves at times because we were just that close to the water. And with all the amazing features of our flying home base RV in the sky, well, it did not have water pontoons to land in water. If we hit the water, well, we would be crashed in the ocean. Tiny announced over the plane's PA system, its announcement system. Entering Canada. Avoid a radar. Be close so water no see us. Sarah chuckled. We're entering Canada and shortly the United States, literally. Under the radar, like smugglers, like your father, Richard. She added, Richard, your long-lost biological father is... She paused, and then continued. He is not so lost, you know. Sarah grinned and continued again. He runs a small inter-island flight operation in the Caribbean called Silver Airways, under the alias he had as your birth father. He operates Silver Airways under his larger operation that serves from the Caribbean to the rest of the world, including service to the US, which he calls Silver Seaborne Airlines. Sarah smiled. Your biological father, Silver Seaborne, did not die or even vanish. In fact, he is open about his identity now and of his whereabouts. She added, behind his two public organizations, he formed a smuggling operation as well, using the public airlines to cover his illicit transports and operations. I understand he still sells illegal weapons and munitions, amongst other dealings. Bob interrupted. Whoa, wait a minute. So, Richard, your Aunt Zyra Milmore and your father, Silver Seaborne, they were both international criminal organization founders, operators, and profiteers? Bob contemplated. It makes you wonder, Richard. It makes you wonder. How much of Silver, your father, and Zyra, your great aunt, is inside you? He added, I mean, inside all three of you. You all three seem to have a code that guides you. And that code that guides you may well justify what you want to do as being just and righteous. Bob kind of drifted off in a mumble. Makes you wonder. Taylor interjected. Wait one moment, please. She almost implored with a disrespectful tone. She challenged. Apples are not defined by their trees. Every apple has its own seeds and future. She asserted none of us, not one single person in the entire world, is defined by their parents, their grandparents, by anyone. And their DNA does not define them. Sure, all of that affects who we grow into being, she declared, but it is the culmination of our experiences and how we and others deal with them that shapes and influences us Sarah returned and reminded everyone sternly and wisely that God gave us all free will. That means DNA and parents and genealogy do not define us. Sarah further suggested DNA affects our abilities, and thus it does, to some extent, affect our choices, and in a way, it therefore supports that genetics do in fact have the ability to affect at least some of our apparent free will, solely through the very fact that we have fewer options due to our inabilities. It affects our free will, but only a little bit, only somewhat, she emphasized. Sarah added, our parents and grandparents and family, they are all very important. They offer guidance and values as we grow and learn. So they too influence how we see the world. They do affect our choice selection and choice thinking, and how we see and process problems and opportunities. Sarah sighed. So too, schools, sports, athletics, caretakers, even libraries and their librarians, they all influence. They can even corrupt through shaping and tainting people's values and through their guidance. They can corrupt through censorship of contrarian views and perspectives, and through emphasizing and evangelizing their agenda-driven views, all of which are selfish, self-serving, for themselves and for their tainted values, rather than for God's values. Sarah shifted topics. Let's get back to your father, Richard. As Bob had suggested, I imagine you and your father may have far more in common than perhaps you would like to admit. You're even flying under the radar like a smuggler, just like your father, she smiled. Well, she said, imagine we're on a smuggler's run right now, skimming the ocean's waves to enter Canadian airspace undetected. Don't worry too much. Tiny has done this kind of thing a lot. Yeah, Tiny is thankfully an expert pilot of extraordinary talent. He is experienced in novel and unique situations. Well, let me tell you, there were times that the belly of the plane splashed against the water, or hit a wave, or directly struck the ocean itself with its body. We could not tell. Whatever happened, each and every wave crashed against the hull of the plane. It was terrifyingly scary, all the time. We wave jumped in our plane around the southern end of Nova Scotia and then back north, around its landmass, and then west. We were apparently carefully flying just above the trees as we entered land, all the way, now along the Canadian-USA border, staying on the Canadian side. We flew above the trees all the way, to where New York borders Montreal and Ottawa. As Sarah said, we were literally flying under the radar, by airplane surfing over the waves, and now surfing over the trees, and surfing over the occasional power line. Well, as we neared the Canada-New York-USA border, we hard banked and turned south towards New York. Tiny announced over the PA system, entering USA, avoiding radar, close ground, no see us. We flew above the trees, so close to those trees and power lines, all the way to a place called Lowville. in Lewis County of New York State. Yeah, unbelievably, the place was actually called Lowville. One word, Lowville. Well, we actually flew into the distant farmlands near Lowville in New York. Outside the main Lowville village were rural areas, including farmland. It turned out the Knights Templar had friends in low places, in Lowville, in New York. Indeed, I guess the Knights Templar did have friends in Lowville places. Like that Garth Brooks country song says, "'Cause I've got friends in low places." Well, as it turned out, the Knights Templar had a farm, which was operated by a Knights Templar KT informant, an operative. Sarah described him as a gruff, dark-haired, hard-working country farmer. She said that he wore rough, durable, earthy, usually dirty clothes. She had concluded, "You know, he is the salt of the earth, but he's a real character." Well, that farm had a hangar for crop duster planes, tractors, horse and cattle trailers, and farm equipment, and the like. Tiny descended, and although it was rough, he landed the plane in a hard-braking, very short distance runway. We all lunged forward, but were seat-belted, and so we rode it out like a bucking bronco. Finally, we had landed. We taxied to the farm equipment hangar, which was next to a silo and barn. We were on a real operating farm. And Tiny planned to park our KT RV in the sky cargo plane in that rural Lowville farm hangar, where the crop dusters and other farm equipment were. We made it. We were inside America, without documentation. You might say we illegally entered the country. In a matter of speaking, we were undocumented. We were illegal, undocumented entrants into the USA, or whatever they might label us as. It all, well, seemed rather silly. So much to do about coming and going from the very country that I had started in. When I think about it, it may have been a much easier, albeit longer, trek from the southern border of the United States, because it's so open, than from the northern New York State entry point from Canada. There was allegedly very low security or scrutiny at the southern border with Mexico now. But the Knights Templar Illuminati had their safe house in New York. And so here we were in New York, regardless of how we got here. And being in America, our next stop for the Knights Templar Illuminati was their safe house in the Bronx in New York City of Dis.